from another mother over there, but
I am sorry, Aaron. I didn't mean to. I just hadn't seen James in a while. I was just waving. I had to wave to him.
you know, it's been a long time, man. COVID
It has been a while.
But I am glad to have all of you join me today. This is going to be a very, very informal discussion because I found that in the best way to kind of be as effective as possible, it is to really be interactive and to ask people to really answer questions and to kind of figure out what people's concerns are, what their thoughts are, what things that they problems or issues that they're having as it relates to year 15 and how I can best help assist them and solve that. So that's kind of the format. So feel free to, you know, hit the button, raise your hand, and Aaron will certainly stop me and keep the questions flowing. So now you guys you're joining us after you had several sessions. And so you should have kind of a general kind of understanding of where we are as we get to a year 15 process. And you have the presentation. I can pull it up or and put it on the screen if you need be, but that kind of then makes everybody look small, and I'd rather see all you guys and be able to respond. So just to kind of talk about the presentation in itself and just kind of cover some basics. There's going to be several people at different levels because I see some people on here, and some of the folks I know are really seasoned. Some of the folks might be new to this for the first time. So I want to try to make sure I'm reaching everyone's needs and their questions. So again, if you have any questions, stop me. It's important to kind of understand where you are in the process when you get to year 15. The first thing you have to understand when you talk about tax credit compliance is there's the 10-year credit period, which we refer to as the tax credit period. That's the year that credits are actually flowing through the tax return to the investors and to the general partner at that on that 10-year basis. But the tax credit itself, the compliance period is 15 years. So if you think about it, it's kind of like 2/3 and 1/3, which gets us to the full 15 years. And then you get to year 16, which is kind of like the transition year or the beginning of the extended use year. And so certain deals, when you get to year 16, you might have a limited number of options available to you at year 16. So I always tell people, you know, if you're thinking about year 15, you should really start looking at your documents. Well, let our asset management department tell you should be looking at them every year, but but you should certainly start looking at your documents around year 10, 11, 12 to kind of get a sense of what your options may be, what you signed up to 15 years ago. And the reason I say that is because sometimes the person or persons dealing with the position at that specific time may not have been around when the original deal was put together. So sometimes they don't know what the original intent was. If you're a nonprofit, you know, that's one set of options. If you're a for-profit, that's a little bit different structure. So those things are things that you need to do. And I'd say number one, you have to really understand what's in your documents. And then what's required as a result of that in your transition or post year 15 process. So when you get to year 15 or year 16, how your deal is structured may affect what your options are, what your overall intent long-term might be affected by that. So again, the number one thing I would say is to make sure that you're reviewing your documents so you have a really good understanding of what your position is. In the document that we have, I've kind of put together a couple different scenarios and kind of to really kind of spark questions and to kind of give you a kind of a real life scenario of what you might encounter if you get to year 15. So in the scenario we put together, we have a 60 unit tax credit project that's in kind of a soft urban or suburban market. It's beyond year 15, so it's being year 16 or further. It's mixed income, or excuse me, mixed AMI. So it's got some 30%, 50%, and 60% units. And it also has home units, some low and some high home units. Now, if you're not familiar with low and high home units, or if you're not familiar with the various AMI structures, let me know that now, and I can kind of delve a little deeper into that so that I give you a little bit more of a base understanding. But if you guys all understand it, I'll keep going. Okay, I see no hands. I see nothing in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. Okay. So in this particular deal, the NOI, the net operating income, it's positive, but it's not enough to actually build up any reserves. It handles kind of like the basic repair needs and kind of ongoing operations, but it's not going to build up any reserves. There's really no excess cash there. It does, as you know, most deals when they get to year 15, they have some, depending on how well it's maintained, it could have some significant capital needs. In this particular scenario, we're saying that, yeah, there's significant capital needs that need to be addressed in order to keep the project going long term. Something that you may hear people talk about is being eligible for QC or qualified contract. In this scenario, we're saying this project is eligible for a qualified contract. If there's a question about qualified contract, or if you need me to go in more in depth with that, stop me and I can do that now as well. Okay. I'm so glad everybody's been really well briefed. So, so in this particular scenario,
James, I do see one. James, one person did say they wanted a little more info on that. They put it in the chat there.
Oh, good. I'm glad you caught that.
Yep, go ahead.
So the qualified contract process, and we do deals in multiple states. So in some states, they make you essentially kind of sign a waiver that you won't go in for a qualified contract when you make your application. I'm not sure if MISHA is still doing that now, Mike. Okay, it is. Okay.
They are, yes. Yep.
So some deals have what's called a qualified contract option, which means that the general partner at the 14th year or 15th year of the project, they can go out and they can request from the Housing Finance Agency a qualified contract, which is, there's only two ways to get out of the regulatory agreement that is, that governs your restricted income and rent restrictions or your regulatory agreement. That is either foreclosure or qualified contract. And the qualified contract is a predetermined process that allows you to go to the Housing Finance Agency, the MISHA in this particular case, and request that you're eligible for a qualified contract. There's a process for that. There's an application process, there's cost involved, and there is also a waiting period. So there's about a 1-year waiting period after you've been approved for a qualified contract. You have to market it for a year. In some states, while it is a federal requirement, some states seem to get around that. I'm not advocating for that, but I've worked in other states where they have not followed that, where they should. So qualified contract, then if you're approved for a qualified contract, basically says that you're allowed to then go out of the program, the tax credit program. There's a 3-year transition period for your residents, but so during that 3-year period, you can't like evict somebody. But if a person leaves, you don't have to re-rent that as a tax credit unit. You can re-rent that as a market rate unit. And at the end of 3 years, you can get to the whole project becoming market rate. And that's because the project, for a host of reasons, doesn't work as a tax credit project. And there's a number of qualifying things that go into that assessment. Far too many for me to get into in the hour that we have today. But just keep in mind that there are some deals that have qualified contract as an option. A lot of times those are earlier deals, or deals that may be in year 16, 17 now. They would depend on when they actually got allocation credits. So does that answer everybody's question, or? Okay, good. All right, so what are the options? Given the scenario I just gave you guys, what do you think the options are for the partnership in terms of it's gotten to this point, it's at year 15 or post year 15, these are the specific parameters. What do you guys think the options are available in terms of what your next steps would be? I'd like to kind of get some feedback before I don't want to just give you guys the answer. So any questions, any thoughts?
Feel free to take yourself off of mute.
You could always recycle. This is Amin Irving. You could always recycle the deal and try to put new 4% or 9% credits on it.
Definitely. Hey, Amin.
Hello.
So I'm looking at some of the comments. Yep, reapply for tax credits, continue and apply again. Yep, that's definitely an option.
You could maybe work with a nonprofit to avoid some sort of 51% test rules.
Yep.
Prior to a recycle, maybe.
Yep. Any other thoughts?
Sell it. You could sell your interest.
Yep, that's an option. Yep.
Go through the qualified contract.
Yep. And specifically for this particular deal, definitely, because it has that qualified contract option. So I saw a comment where it says, I noticed that a number of these properties trade or sell is an option, definitely. They could sell their interest to another person or another entity. And then that person may, exercise one of the options that are available to it. Yep, and that's a great comment, Tony, that if you got like scattered sites, single family stuff, it makes a lot of sense that you could sell those options to a tenant. A lot of times those, I've got several of those deals where, when the project was put together, oftentimes you saw that with single family scattered site deals. When the project was put together, the idea was that they would make these available to the tenants at the end of the 15-year compliance period. And there's a significant process involved in doing that, but that's actually one of the ways that you could create home ownership. It's a great concept. It's much more difficult in practice, just because getting the pool of eligible I guess I would call them bankable tenants. Oftentimes tenants, unless they've been in a program where they've understood what it means to be a homeowner and what all comes with that, are probably not equipped. If you just get to the end of the compliance period and just flip it over to them, they're probably not equipped to actually maintain the home, because they whenever there was a problem during the 15-year compliance period, if they had an issue, they called the landlord or the management company, and they came and fixed it. Well, if you're a homeowner, you are the fixer. So it's a little different situation. And then whether or not you actually have the reserves of the capital available to actually make some minor repairs or major repairs, depending on what the situation is. So again, the home ownership piece is really a great aspect and concept. I think what we've seen in practicality is there's a lot more kind of social service that goes along with that to be able to make sure that the resident is capable of being able to be successful in that. but that's a great suggestion. So I'm going to give you what I see as kind of the basic starting points for all deals when they get to the end of the compliance period. And you guys have already touched on most of those. So if you're a nonprofit, there's what's called a right of first refusal. And that's only available to nonprofits. And that allows a nonprofit to approach the limited partner owner and acquire their limited partner interest for basically it's going to be $10 plus any transaction cost. In our case, those transaction costs range roughly around $20,000. And basically they set up what's called a substitute limited partner entity, and we transfer our limited partner interest to that substitute limited partner interest, or to a limited partner. The reason we do that is you want to keep the partnership going. You don't want to terminate the partnership. So if either one of the partners were to just leave, then the partnership itself terminates, and you don't want that to happen. So, and you can't have the same general partner that's in the partnership own the limited partner and the general partner interest, because that again terminates the partnership because it's not two separate entities. A partnership has to have two entities, a general partner, limited partner, or at least two, special limited partner, what have you, but it has to have at least two entities. And so under a nonprofit, that's definitely an option for them. And it's probably the cheapest option available. They basically acquire our limited partner interest in a separate entity, and they basically control the left and the right hand. And so they control the partnership. And it doesn't make a difference if it's 50 units or if it's 150 units. If they have a right of first refusal, as long as they meet those intended guidelines, they have a pretty built-in set of options for them as far as acquiring the limited partner interest. Another option, and this is one that I always suggest, regardless of what choice you make, you always want to pick up the limited partner's interest because that gives you control of the partnership. And then you can make a decision whether you want to hold the property in its current status and figure out a long-term or short-term repositioning strategy, whether you want to refinance the property. Again, if you always want to do that after you got the limited partner interest. The reason I say that is if you say, okay, I want to refinance, I get to year 16, and I want to refinance the property. As long as we are a partner in that, and if you look at your documents, we participate, and I say we, Synair being a limited partner or a syndicator, we participate in the proceeds that are generated by that refinance. So as an owner, if you're looking to refinance or reposition a property and you don't want to share those proceeds with your limited partner, whether it's us or anyone else, you want to acquire that limited partner interest first and then do that next step. So if it's applying for a MSHDA loan or HUD loan, conventional bank financing, whatever it is, you probably want to do that after you've acquired our limited partner interest. Same thing if you want to sell to a third party. If you sell to that third party and we're a member of the partnership, we share in any proceeds that come from that, whether you're a nonprofit or not. The nonprofit basically just gives you the option of exercising your ROFR, your right of first refusal.
Is anyone else frozen?
This along, I think when I first started, the minimum might have been 15 or 20 grand, and rehab costs is probably higher than that now. Yes, but there's certain minimums that have to be met in order to qualify for that rehab or that refinance. So keep that in mind. As Amin mentioned, some of the things that, if you're a for-profit developer and it may be advantageous to partner with a nonprofit. A lot of times we see for-profits and nonprofits partner because the nonprofit doesn't have the balance sheet that's sufficient to basically go in for resyndication. And they need that for-profit partner to basically bolster them and basically make them eligible to qualify for resyndication. So there's a number of things involved in this. Again, we mentioned qualified contract. That is definitely an option, and certainly, Mike, you might be able to opine to this. I think, has there ever been a QC that was denied?
Not in Michigan, no.
Yeah.
And the prices are weird that the QC price is usually way higher than the fair market value.
Right. Yeah, it's a crazy process, but it's, certainly, especially if the economics of the deal makes sense, it might be the absolute best option. Now, if you're a nonprofit partner and you have a nonprofit deal and you don't have Scenair as your syndicator, you may have heard of a term that's in the market called vulture syndicator or aggregator. And those are people who are entities that have purchased limited partner interest from various syndicators, other syndicators. And they do that with the intent of waiting till you get to the end of your compliance period and figuring out a way to revoke your right of first refusal, or to make you go for for the qualified contract, which again uncaps a lot of the value, especially if you're a nonprofit partner and you've got a 100-unit deal. It's worth a lot more in the open market than it is as just a transfer of limited partner interest to the nonprofit. So keep that in mind. I always say it's critically important who you have as your syndicator or limited partner, because it is, as you guys probably have known by now, it is somewhat of a marriage, and you want an amicable separation, not a tumultuous one. So again, we kind of talked about the basic starting point. So in looking at this particular example, nonprofit has the option of going for ROFR. I mentioned you should always try to acquire the LP interest because that's going to give you a lot more options. You could go for the qualified contract, and you could also sell to a third party or resyndicate. You could go in for resyndication. There's a couple of ways you could do Resyndication. There's a 4%, I guess I used to say non-competitive, but I think everything's competitive now. But 4% allocation with MISTA, or you could go in for the competitive round for the 9%. The underwriting criteria over the past 10 years has gotten a lot more stringent, a lot more, I guess I would say definitely more difficult, in that the goal is the success of the project long term. So MISTA does a much more intense dive into making sure that the deal has a higher probability or likelihood of being successful. The idea that you can just go in for tax credits is a little bit more involved and much more onerous than may have been in the last several years. So I kind of keep that in mind. Any questions about that specific scenario? Am I answering everyone's questions? Is the flow going right? Is everybody kind of in tune here? I just want to make sure everybody's getting their thoughts and their questions at least addressed. So
I have a question,
yes.
Patricia Bosch. At the onset of your conversation, you mentioned that you would want to buy the limited partners interest, but you said it could cost $10 plus transaction costs of $20,000.
Yes.
To come up with $20,000 on a nonprofit basis would be a little bit scary right now. How do you manage to get the 20,000?
Well, what we found is that sometimes nonprofits, if they're looking to maintain the housing, depending on what the specific deal is, what we found over the years is there's smaller deals have much more difficulty. So if you've got a deal that's 25 units or so, that is more of a challenge. And Pat, you and I will probably be talking because we've got your deal that I'll be working on later this year.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I know I know you're asking that question directly to me. But sometimes we found where a limited partner will, on extremely rare occasions, work with a nonprofit if they can see a way to make it work so the housing can stay affordable. It's very, very, very rare that a syndicator won't at least cover their cost, because that's basically what our costs are, our internal cost, roughly 20 grand to do this. So we collect that, and we've never, I'd say out of the 200 or 300 deals I've done, I've maybe had 4 or 5 across maybe 5 or 6 states where we have made an exception. So it's extremely rare that we do that. Oftentimes we will refer the nonprofit to sources, and Stacy may know a little bit about this, but I know a lot of times nonprofits will work with the city, or they work with other folks to get some support to help look at the long-term viability of a project. So that's usually one of the options. We try to refer them to other sources so that we can, because again, part of the thing that you're looking at is if you're a nonprofit and you don't have the ability to actually acquire, a project for such a small amount, where do you think you would have the capacity to continue a project without, some support from a limited partner or from another partner? So the idea would think of, we're trying to look for a solution long-term that would work for preserving the affordability. And I've probably had 1 or 2 deals out of, again, the 200 or 300 I've done where just under no circumstances could we preserve the affordability. And it wasn't in the best interest of the property or the tenants to preserve that affordability. The deal needed to be redone without tax credits. So it's very rare, very, very rare, but we've had that happen.
Thank you.
James, we have a question in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm just looking at,
Okay.
Go ahead.
How
likely is it that at year 15, multifamily property struggling? Actually, that's quite likely. And that's why the general partner has to look at what their options are. If the deal is struggling and a potential resyndication won't fix it, if you look at the options that are available to a property, and I'll step back for a second. I'll give you my asset management take on property pre-year 15. So there's 2 things that you've got to do when you have a project. You've always got to be able to lease units and collect rents. So those are the 2 basics. If you're leasing units and collecting the rents that you have, that's not necessarily an operational issue. Now you're looking at, what is the problem with my project? If you're leasing units and you're collecting the rents, and you're collecting a high level of rent, you're not, you don't have a 20%, vacancy rate or a 20%, loss of collection rate. then you probably have a structural issue, meaning that the way the project is structured financially needs to be addressed. This next scenario that we talk about in scenario B kind of looks at a mortgage modification or a second option to kind of get to a repositioning or recapitalization. If you're at that point where you're leasing units and you're collecting rents, but your deal just won't work, then that means you got a structural issue. And I mean financially structural issue. So you have to look at how do you restructure that deal to make it work. And that could include a host of things. But definitely that's your next step at that point. So that's a great lead in. So now we can kind of look at the second scenario, which is an example of a 48 unit rural deal that has 30s, 40s, 50% AMI units and some low and high home units. And it's also financed with Michigan tax exempt bonds. It's in year 17, so it's well beyond the initial 15-year compliance period. It's in what we call the extended use period. The property struggles because, and we see this, many times when we talk about how a deal was originally put together. How it was originally put together may not be what's best for the tenants now or what the market is right now. So in this particular case, the property had like only $17,000 in replacement reserves, but it had large capital needs that probably were going to be in the next 5 to 7 years. It's operating again on a break-even kind of thing, but it's not able to pay any LD distributions. It's not able to do anything that would contribute to the owners at all. And one of the reasons we always mention how a deal is structured. So when you talk about like having home units have a 20-year compliance period versus tax credits have a 15-year compliance period. So if you've got home units, your home agreement, assuming it was started on time like it was supposed to be, that's an inside joke. But assuming you have a home agreement, it was started when it was supposed to be, it should end 20 years after you're placed in service. So during that 5-year hiatus, you can't go in for new tax credits. So you got to figure out, how do I get this deal to the end of the home units so that I can go in for kind of a full recapitalization? And so you're not likely going to qualify for a 9% or 4% deal. In this particular case, what's great about this scenario is you have a strong owner that has a lot of tax credit experience. So it's somebody like me, right? So
James, can
yes.
you briefly just define what a home unit is?
Yes. So home units, a lot of times when a deal is put together, home units are what are basically, I don't even remember what the home stands for. I've been using the term for so long, but it is basically federal money that comes into a deal, usually comes through community development block grant funds or some other, I forget what the initiating legislation is that provides the home funds. Mike, you might be able to opine on that, but home funds basically is another set of soft money that actually comes into a deal. And it allows the project to meet some gap financing issues. So when a deal might be put together, oh yes, housing opportunity made easy. Okay, thank you. I did not know that. Thank you, Ami. But it allows you to put some soft money into a project so that it makes the project work in initial structure. Home funds usually have what they call high home or low home. Those are a separate set of governing regulatory documents that say what you can charge for rents and what you can, the income limits for the persons living in those units. So if you could think about tax credit units, most tax credit units are typically 60% AMI, area median income. Home units might be, a low home might be, significantly less than what you might get in a 60% tax credit. So it means that your income that the person who is in the unit, their income threshold, how much they're able to make is less, as well as what they're able to pay. And so there's usually specific units that are identified as home units. So if you've got a project, that's got 50 units, you might have 10 home units. And those home units are going to require you to keep your affordability period for that to the end of that home compliance, which would be 20 years. So even though you're at the end of your 15-year tax credit compliance, you've got these home units, you can't really go in for a new resyndication until you get to that 20-year period where the home units basically have, that regulatory agreement for home units have been met. So that's kind of like the reason that it's so important to understand the structure of your deal when it's put together, or in a lot of cases in terms of nonprofit, something you may have inherited, but understanding that impacts what your options are. Again, I always say, start looking at these things in year 11, 12, because there are more tools in the toolbox the earlier we start to examine what's going on. Then if we get to year 15, 16, 17, we've got a lot less tools in there because, it's just, less time and less ability to maybe make some changes. So
one more follow-up. There was
Yes.
one more follow-up question to the home units. Is that available for just nonprofits?
Actually, home units are available basically, I just see where Amin posted. I was gonna say, what is that? All right. Home units are primarily, a lot of times when I see home units, they actually come to, say, a general partner. And the general partner, same being a nonprofit, will lend those funds into a partnership. Even though they lent those funds into a partnership, they're still bound by the regulatory agreement that accompanies the home unit because it is federal money. So they will still have to meet those. Now, is it available to a for-profit? Actually, it is. But it's more the purpose of the funds and how it's used than who the requester is. So I do know of cases where a for-profit project got home funds, but usually the way it gets into the actual project is usually through some other entity that loans the money into the project so that it gets into the sources and uses. The reason, and without getting too deep into this, there is certain guidelines that require you to be able to understand, certain federal guidelines that require you to be able to have what's called an AFR, applicable federal rate, which means it can't be a grant. Grant dollars coming into a project actually reduces the tax credit basis. And so the money has, in order for it to get into the project, in order for it to be viable and useful, and so that the syndicator is able to utilize maximize their tax credit eligibility related to the total development cost. Those funds cannot be a grant. Grant funds actually reduce your eligibility when it comes to what you're able to apply for tax credits for. So in the structuring process, that's usually coming into a deal as soft money. And sometimes it's loaned in as, say, let's say you got $500,000 of home funds. It may be in there at a 1% interest rate, and the interest and principal is deferred until, say, 20 years. So it's kind of like a big balloon at the end of the home compliance period. And that way, it it shows up as deferred interest and actually it does end up flowing through as a little bit of a benefit to the limited partner. I just got a notice that says my internet is unstable. Can you guys see me? It's not jumping around, is it?
No.
You froze up for a minute, but you're good to go.
Okay. Okay, cool. So, what if, as you look at this deal, what is the temporary solution and kind of what is the long-term solution? Thoughts? Or did you all skip ahead? Nobody? Okay. Well, not to spoil it. So in this particular case, Mishta, oh, we do. Okay, hold on. Let's see here. Oh, thank you, Stacy, for posting that. That's great. That's very good. Thank you. So what, in this particular case, what Mishta did to help get this, it provided a temporary solution. And what they did was a mortgage modification. So they did a 3-year principal deferral. And those principal funds instead went to fund a replacement reserve. And so whatever you might have been paying for, in this particular case, you know, for your Mishta payment, you may have been paying interest only, but that principal portion was then being funded back to a replacement reserve so that would help stabilize the property. They also, and this is something that I've been advocating for years, is when you get to a post year 15 position. So during the 15-year compliance period, this is not an option because it's mandated by the federal government. But in the post year 15 position, there is some flexibility within the HFAs to be able to take some of the units from maybe 60% of AMI to 80% of AMI, because that, in this particular case, one of the reasons that they were struggling was most of their tenants were over income, or the people that are applying were over income. And so if they could get some 80% AMI residents, even if they're paying 60% rents, if they can get, you know, the 80% AMI residents, then they have stronger tenants who are able to pay. So then their cash flow is more stable and they're able to actually build up some reserves and actually be able to support the project better. So that was one of the options that Mishta actually allowed them to have. They made the owner obviously kick in some money, and the owner had a history of actually funding deficits as well. So they took that into consideration. And all of that whole purpose was to get the project to the end of the home compliance so that they could come up with the long-term solution, which in this particular case would have been a full recapitalization, which would have been a re-syndication. They could have looked at maybe selling it, you know, again, some of the options that we've talked about, but that is something that Mishta did. No, not after. I just got a question from Amin. Can you take the 30% AMI units to 80% AMI after year 10? No, it only can happen after year 15. And Mike, I think we went round and round on this, like with some QC conversations one time. What was the specific, and I know you know the specific language or where it was in the tax credit piece, why you couldn't do it until it was after year 15?
Yeah, they will allow it after year 15 on a temporary basis. I just want to be clear that it was a temporary thing. And I don't, that was a few years ago, to be honest. There's been some changes there's been some lawsuits in other states that I don't know if they do that again. It gets into like sort of changing set asides and some of those other things. So it may not be may not be able to replicate it, but yeah, it was done. I might not have been done on the up and up or right, but we'll see. I would say have a conversation with Mishta if you want to approach that kind of a situation, but I don't know with the lawsuits that happened the last couple of years if it would be able to be done again.
Yeah, and Amin had asked if Mishta had ever approved waiving the 30% AMI units to 60% AMI during the 10-year compliance period. I don't think so, but
Typically not. No, not if you've
Yeah.
got points for them. No.
Yeah, I'll say, because, and that's a good distinction that to bring up, is a lot of times you have to think about when a deal was put together, what was the set aside, or what was the pot of money that they get, that they applied, or who their peers were when they applied, and they were awarded that tax credit award. And Mike, you might be able to opine on this, but my understanding is you cannot you cannot change your structure or your set aside. You know, because basically, if that were the original structure, then you might not have been awarded tax credits, because a lot of times there's kind of like a formula that looks at how, you know, does this deal provide all the benefits it said it would, and what's the biggest and best buck, I think, for it compared to its peer group of applicants.
Yeah, yep, and that's pretty much the rationale behind it, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I thought
If you got-
Mishta had kind of changed their approach on that.
I would say if you have a 4% deal, it might not be the same, right?
Right.
And Mr. keeps that in place through the initial compliance period. After that initial 15 years, then you can have a conversation with them, and they will let them typically go up if there's a need for it. I mean, I don't think they want to reduce the number of deep targeted units if they don't have to, but if you have a need for it, I would have the conversation after year 15.
So the last couple of slides are more like questions kind of related to like regulatory relief and potentially resyndication. Are there questions, did everybody get a chance to look through that? Are there questions that people may have that may relate to a specific deal they're working on, a hypothetical deal that they think about?
James, I just wanted to make a comment on the many times that deals that may having cash flow problems, looking at your gross rent potential, you know, in those later years, or if you've had management company changes, rental increases may have not been as diligent. And when you get behind and you're not doing, you know, rental increases on an annual basis, you really don't ever make that money up. It's you can't make it up. So you have to be diligent from year one. That's why, you know, the pro formas start in year 2 with 3% rental increases. And so, you know, being diligent, I guess, with those rental increases in the later years, you can, owners can kind of forget about it, thinking that their management company is on top of it. So it can get lost, but that 3% really does make a big difference, you know, as the years go on in those deals.
That's an excellent point, Josh. And you know, we've seen this in a number of deals. You really, as an owner, should be doing an annual review of your rent structure. Because I mentioned from the onset, if a deal is going to be successful, there's 2 things that's got to take place. You've got to lease units, you've got to collect rents. But most importantly is you've got to assess that market to know, you know, if your rents can move up, you should. If they cannot, then you need to understand that and kind of contemplate what does that mean long term. And if they can't move up, or, you know, sometimes you've always had, you know, temporary situations for maybe a year or 2 where you couldn't. But, and Josh knows this really well, we've seen deals where, you know, the rent increase took place in year 2 and the next one was year 12. So, you know, and now they're trying to make, you know, and you're going to be capped and limited in what you're able to do in rent increases, you know, when you get later in the process. So as we talk about, you know, options, you really need to start looking at deals. You know, I always say, if you're thinking about year 15, you should be thinking about that in year 10. But certainly, you know, every year, just from an owner's perspective, you should be looking at what should I be doing on an annual basis to make sure that I am positioning this property to be successful. And one of those things is definitely reviewing your market every year and determining, even if you're going up $20, that $20 over time can make a big difference.
And I had a question, James. Did you mention capital accounts?
I didn't because, I thought most of the folks here were probably going to be nonprofit. And so capital accounts probably won't make a difference. But for those few folks that, and that's an excellent question, Josh. For those few folks who are for-profit, capital accounts play a bigger role in what the valuation looks like at the end of the compliance period. And the reason I say that is if you're a for-profit developer, and let me see how many of the 16 or so folks here, I know Amin is, how many for-profit developers do we have here? If you could just hit the raise your hand button, that would help me understand that. Okay, Amin, you out here by yourself, right? Oh, Barbara, okay.
Yeah, I think you got a couple, 2 or 3.
Okay. Okay, Amin and Barbara. Okay. And Lori, okay. Oh, Kathy McKean, okay. Lori, yep. So as a for-profit developer, what happens is there's a section in your LPA, your limited partnership agreement, that talks about capital accounts, and the IRS has what they call 704B, and this is a little bit of I'm going to give you as most of a condensed version I can of this. 704B says that you have to distribute proceeds from a sale in accordance with capital accounts. Well, the pro forma says what your capital accounts are expected to be at the end of the compliance period. And we all know that 99.9% of the time doesn't happen exactly like the pro forma, right? So sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. In those particular cases, if under a hypothetical sale analysis, if the project were sold and you distributed proceeds in accordance with the capital accounts, you might have a deal that says the general partner is going to get 80% and the limited partner is getting 20%. But when you distribute it and you allocate things in accordance with the capital accounts, it means that the general partner may end up with 55% and the limited partner ends up with 45%. And the reason being is because you have to true those up at the end of the, upon a sale. And without getting, because we could spend an hour and a half just talking about capital accounts by itself. But the reason that it's so important to be reviewing these things ahead of time is that, that is an IRS regulation that we're supposed to follow. Oftentimes we will have conversations with our for-profit general partners and say, okay, what's reasonable? Because also under a sales scenario, the investor limited partner may have to approve that, which means we have to go to investors to get their approval, which means we have to make a case on behalf of the general partner as to why the limited partner investors should accept X amount of dollars when if the property was sold under a hypothetical sale or actually sold in real life, then their distribution of proceeds would be much higher. So oftentimes I find myself advocating for the general partner for what is a reasonable thing so that we can get their approval at the investor level. Did anybody got a question on that? We got 2 more minutes. Okay, thank you, Barbara. And as I always make, everybody who knows me knows that they can give me an email or give me a call and ask me a specific question as it relates to year 15 or those things. I'm always open to giving my experience and oftentimes my opinion. But Oh, Aaron, can you post my email to everybody? It should be in the presentation. I think it's in the very first page and usually on the last page. Yeah, it's on the very first page of the presentation. So did I answer everyone's questions or did I just give a big fog out there?
I just scared everybody. Well, if there's no other questions for James, I want to thank James for doing the presentation. I thought it was great. If anybody does need to get a hold of him and can't find him, contact Aaron, myself, or Josh. We're happy to shovel you over to James there. So
Happy to do it, guys.
and I
Thank you.
think so. This was the last presentation of the 6. I just want to thank everybody for participating. I know a lot of folks hung in and did all 6 of them, which is great. They are all recorded, and I will send out a link to the recordings. They are on our Scenarios YouTube page. So you can go out there and look at them. 4 of them are out there now, and then last week's and this week's will get put out there probably the next day or 2, but I'll send that link out to everybody so they have it. One last plug, thanks to the city of Detroit for funding these TA sessions. Without them, this wouldn't have gotten done. And thanks to Stacy and Enterprise for all of their work with the preservation team. They're doing a lot of good work over there. If anybody has questions or wants to connect, Stacy's around. You can contact myself, and I'm doing a lot of stuff with the team as well. So we're more than happy to answer questions, help you out, or help you figure out how to preserve your assets.
Well said, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, so with
And, yeah,
that,
if anyone
we-
wants to get a hold of me, let me know.
with that, the TA session is complete. So I appreciate everybody being on. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
See you guys. Take care.